welcome to Indus News Live from Sampad. I'm Hira Mustafa and these are the headlines. Indian troops have martyred 4 more civilians in occupied Jammu and Kashmir. The youths were targeted during a so-called cordon and search operations in Pulwama and Shopian districts. It comes a day after the occupying troops killed 3 civilians in a military raid in Shopian. In Myanmar, security forces have shot dead another 4 protesters in the city of Bagu near Yangon. Despite the violence, civilians across the country are rallying again today against the military coup. But the junta claims the protest campaign is dwindling since people want peace. Security forces have killed over 600 protesters and detained nearly 3,000 people following February 1st coup. Iran has ruled out halting any of nuclear-related activities until the US lifts all sanctions and returns to the 2015 nuclear deal. Iran's envoy to Vienna, Abbas Araghchi, made the remarks just hours before the second round of revival talks of the deal with world powers. Yesterday, the US expressed its readiness to lift all sanctions on Iran to resume compliance with the nuclear agreement. Moscow has warned Kiev of military intervention if any Russian citizen in eastern Ukraine is harmed. President's Deputy Chief of Staff Dmitry Kozak says the beginning of hostilities will be the beginning of the end of Ukraine. Meanwhile, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky visited Donbass and said 26 servicemen have been killed this year. The US says it is discussing its concerns over Russia's largest military buildup since 2014 with its NATO allies. India has again reported record-high single-day COVID-19 cases as 131,000 tested positive overnight. In Pakistan, 105 people lost their lives to the virus and more than 5,300 tested positive. Meanwhile, Norwegian police have fined Prime Minister Erna Solberg for breaking COVID-19 rules in a family gathering of her birthday celebrations. Globally, the virus has claimed nearly 2.9 million lives and infected over 133 million others. Well, these were the headlines. News in detail coming after the short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Now the news in detail. Indian troops have martyred 4 more civilians in occupied Jammu and Kashmir. This takes the toll of martyred Kashmiris to 7 since yesterday. 2 youth were targeted during a so-called cordon and search operation at the Nebu area of Pulwama, while 2 more youth were killed in the Jan Mohalla area of Shopian. Earlier, the troops martyred 3 youth in the Jan Mohalla, where the operation was stopped last night. The military resumed its raid early today and it is still underway in that area. The occupying troops have martyred at least 325 Kashmiris since New Delhi revoked the special status of the valley in August 2019. For more on this, we are joined by Ali Sultan, an international law expert from Lahore. Sir, thank you for joining us. Mr. Ali, India has intensified its brutalities in occupied Jammu and Kashmir, martyring 7 more civilians in the past 24 hours. How can these extrajudicial killings of Kashmiris be challenged in the International Criminal Court to hold India accountable?
These are also violations of international humanitarian law, including Geneva Conventions and customary international humanitarian law. Now, in terms, and you've also got to remember that Indian forces are operating with absolute impunity in Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir under a very draconian law, the Armed Forces Special Powers Act. So that's really the legal outlay which allows them to perpetrate such heinous crimes against humanity. Now, in terms of holding India accountable internationally, in tribunals like the International Criminal Court, that's a bit of a challenge because that requires India to be a party to the Rome Statute. And since India is not a party to the Rome Statute, unless the United Nations Security Council asks the International Criminal Court to investigate and prosecute perpetrators of these atrocities, trying these Indian officials in international courts would be difficult. But there are other regimes, such as the Magnitsky laws that have been passed in the US and Canada in the European Union. And I would like to see those countries sanctioning these individuals, Indian officials who are responsible for these extrajudicial killings under those Magnitsky laws, if the Magnitsky regime is to gain any credibility at the international level.
Mr. Ali, Pakistan has been highlighting the Kashmir issue at all the international forums. Why do we not see global outrage over the miseries of Kashmiris under India's illegal annexation and even before that?
There has been a bit of an outrage. Of course, there needs to be much more pressure that needs to be applied on India in order to compel it to stop these egregious war crimes which it has been committing. But just a few years ago, in 2018, as well as in 2019, there have been two reports that were released by the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. And both of these reports extensively lay out these human rights violations, including many instances of extrajudicial killings. So to say that there has been no outrage at the international level would perhaps not be correct. But as I said, the international community needs to take up the Kashmir issue with as much vigor as it has done in the case of the Rohingyas, for instance, recently. So that's what should happen ideally. But in addition to the Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights, there have been several rapporteurs and experts of the UN who have, from time to time, called out India on these violations as well.
Mr. Ali Sultan, thank you for talking to Indus News. And now moving on, in Myanmar, security forces have shot dead another 4 protesters in the city of Bago near Yangon. Security forces have killed over 600 protesters and detained nearly 3,000 people following February 1st coup. Despite the violence, civilians across the country are rallying again today against the military coup. But the junta claims the protest camping is dwindling since people want peace. In a news conference, junta spokesperson said government ministries will resume full operation soon. Brigadier Zaw Minton said the election must be held within 2 years. He said reports that the international community did not recognize the military government are fake. Meanwhile, 18 ambassadors to Myanmar issued a joint statement calling for the restoration of democracy. Iran has ruled out halting any of nuclear-related activities until the U.S. lifts all sanctions and returns to the 2015 nuclear deal. Iran's envoy to Vienna, Abbas Araghchi, made the remarks just hours before the second round of revival talks of the deal with world powers. Araghchi particularly rejected scaling back 20% enrichment of uranium, saying the process is moving forward at great pace. Earlier, Araghchi said Iran continues to cooperate with International Atomic Energy Agency for its fact-checking mission. Yesterday, the U.S. expressed its readiness to lift all sanctions on Iran to resume compliance with the nuclear agreement. The indirect talks between US and Iran on nuclear deal are facilitated by the EU, France, Germany, UK, Russia and China. Seoul says Tehran has released a South Korean ship and captain it detained amid a dispute over frozen funds. This came hours before the start of negotiations between Iran and world powers in Vienna over the nuclear deal. In a statement, Seoul's foreign ministry said the staff is in good health and the ship has departed Iran. There has been no confirmation from Tehran yet. Iranian authorities seized the Hankuk Chemi and its multinational crew of 20 sailors in January. They accused the vessel of polluting the Strait of Hormuz. Tehran has repeatedly denied that the seizure of the vessel was linked to the funds issue. Iran says it will undoubtedly respond to the attack on its ship in the Red Sea once it identifies the culprits. The SOYUZ was hit by a limpet mine on Tuesday and has allegedly been used by Iran's Revolutionary Guards as a command and control center. Iran's military spokesperson said Tehran will make a move after its investigations are concluded with utmost accuracy. In an interview, the spokesperson said Iran suspects Israel and the US to be the perpetrator of the attack. He added the US has been involved in all attempts to undermine and harm Iran. However, the US earlier denied responsibility for the attack. Yemen's Houthi rebels claim they have hit Saudi warplanes in an armed drone attack at the JAZAN airport. However, the Saudi-led Arab coalition has denied the claims, saying it destroyed the drone before it could hit its target. In a statement, coalition spokesperson Turki al-Maliki said the drone was intercepted over Yemeni airspace. The spokesperson added it is Houthis' second such strike within a day. Meanwhile, Houthi spokesperson said the designated target has been hit with high precision. Moscow has warned Kiev of military intervention if any Russian citizen in eastern Ukraine is harmed. President's Deputy Chief of Staff Dmitry Kozak says the beginning of hostilities will be the beginning of the end of Ukraine. In an interview, Kozak said it is a self-inflicted wound, a shot not in the leg but in the face. He added the intensity of Moscow's reaction depends on the heat of the situation. Meanwhile, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky visited Donbass and said 26 servicemen have been killed this year. Clashes between Ukrainian troops and the Moscow-backed rebels have intensified recently, while Russia has been increasing the number of troops at the Ukrainian border. The US says Russia's military buildup is the largest since 2014, when it annexed Crimea and backed separatist territory seizures. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said Washington is discussing its concerns with its NATO allies. Earlier in a phone call, German Chancellor Angela Merkel also asked Russian President Vladimir Putin to pull back the troops. At least 11 Nigerian soldiers have been killed in an attack on a patrolling party in central Benue State. In a statement, an army spokesperson said the troops were initially declared missing while on a routine operational task. But he said that search and rescue team later found the bodies of one officer and 10 soldiers. He said efforts are ongoing to track down the perpetrators of this heinous crime to bring them to justice. Troops routinely patrol in Nigeria's middle belt as enduring clashes between farmers and herders have reignited recently. India has again reported record high single-day COVID-19 cases as 131,000 tested positive overnight. Globally, the virus has claimed nearly 2.9 million lives and infected 133 million others. Details in this report. With scary new variants challenging vaccine effectiveness and economic disparity across nations affecting immunization drives, it is hard to tell how long it would take to contain COVID-19. The worst hit Latin America and the Caribbean are struggling to inoculate populations. Economic woes in these regions add fuel to the fire, as a new study revealed that the pandemic has unemployed 1 in every 6 adults aged 18 to 29. Brazil has recorded its highest daily deaths as 4,249 people lost their lives overnight. Brazil's Senate is set to open an investigation into President Jair Bolsonaro's pandemic response. Meanwhile, the U.S. has donated field hospitals to Argentina to boost efforts to combat the spread of the virus.
This ceremony highlights the steadfast partnership between the United States and Argentina in combating COVID-19. The Western Hemisphere is our shared home, our neighborhood, and what we're doing here is being good neighbors and assisting each other. The United States and Argentina share the same democratic values, such as respect for the rule of law, free and fair elections, and human rights.
Although the UK's vaccination program and the lockdown have led to a 60% drop in infections, the World Health Organization has warned that it is not enough to protect Britain from another wave. Netherlands, Portugal, the Philippines, and Australia are the latest countries to limit the use of the AstraZeneca vaccine, dealing further blows to the company's hopes to deliver a vaccine worldwide.
The planning from the vaccination.
We do not expect this to have a major impact on the vaccination operation. We are aiming to have given at least a first shot to people with an increased risk. So everyone who is 60 or older and people with an increased medical risk by the second half of May. We do not expect any major changes to that plan.
Australia has already announced plans to purchase 20 million doses of Pfizer's vaccine. Meanwhile, India is investigating potential domestic cases of blood clots as a side effect of vaccines. COVID-19 has claimed another 105 lives in Pakistan and infected over 5,300 people in the past 24 hours. The Health Ministry says a nationwide death toll has reached 15,229. It said the country's positivity ratio has dropped to 9.66%, but the number of active cases is approaching 70,000. The ministry said a total of nearly 711,000 cases have been detected so far. It noted out of these, almost 626,000 have recovered. Meanwhile, Pakistan's Drug Regulatory Authority has granted emergency use authorization to the third Chinese vaccine, CoronaVac. Pakistan's Foreign Minister says the entire nation takes pride in the achievements of its armed forces. Shah Mahmood Qureshi visited the Armed Forces Institute of Rehabilitation Medicine in Rawalpindi to meet the war-wounded soldiers. Military's media wing, ISPR, says Qureshi appreciated the high morale of soldiers. It said the Foreign Minister paid tribute for forces' contributions for peace and stability in the region. Qureshi said Pakistanis acknowledge the sacrifices of their forces across the length and breadth of the country. Pakistan Army Surgeon General Lieutenant General Nigar Johar accompanied the Foreign Minister on the visit. The Rehabilitating Institute is for the soldiers who lost their limbs during military operations, and it also attends to civilians. More news stories coming up after the short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. In the Northern Irish capital of Belfast, violent clashes among Unionists, Nationalists and police over post-Brexit rules continued for the 7th consecutive night. Police used water cannons to disperse demonstrators who threw petrol bomb and stones on the security forces. Around 100 people attacked police armored vehicles in an Irish nationalist area. The U.S. State Department has voiced concerns over the mounting tensions, calling for political and economic stability in the area.
As I said before, President Biden has been unequivocal in his support for the Belfast and Good Friday Agreement, which was an historic achievement. We believe that we must protect it, and we believe that we must ensure it doesn't become a casualty of Brexit.
Turkey has summoned the Italian ambassador over the Italian premier's remarks about President Tayyip Erdogan. Mario Draghi had called the Turkish president a dictator at a news conference on Thursday. Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Cavusoglu also urged Draghi to take back his unacceptable remarks. This follows the diplomatic row that erupted over seating arrangements in Erdogan's meeting with European leaders. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen was left without a seat during talks in Ankara. The United States says it has to modernize the country's nuclear arsenal. Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm says the U.S. will maintain the stockpile to make sure that it is safe and effective. At a press briefing, she said the nuclear deterrent is important and it is embedded in the values of that stockpile. Granholm added the U.S. will continue to keep arsenals to deter any aggression from other countries. She said Washington will make sure that Americans are safe. China has slammed the U.S. ban on 7 supercomputing entities with alleged links to the Chinese military. The Foreign Ministry said Beijing will take necessary measures to protect the rights and interests of its companies. Spokesperson Zhao Lijian said U.S. suppression cannot hold back China's scientific and technological development. Earlier, the U.S. Commerce Department accused the companies of assisting Chinese military efforts. In a statement, Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo said these supercomputing capabilities are vital for nuclear and hypersonic weapons. SOYUZ MS-18 carrier rocket has blasted off from Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan with a manned spacecraft. Russian state media said the spacecraft will deliver 2 Russians and 1 NASA astronaut to the International Space Station. The experts will spend 6 months working on biology, biotechnology, and earth science experiments. The launch marks 60 years of human spaceflight, with the SOYUZ named after Yuri Gagarin, the first person to reach space. China has successfully launched an experimental satellite from the Taiyuan Center in northern Shanxi province. The satellite, the third of the Xian-6 series, was launched by a Long March 4B carrier rocket. It will carry out space environment service and experiments on related technologies. The launch marks the 365th mission by the Long March rocket series. In Egypt, archaeologists have unearthed a large pharaonic city which had lain unseen for centuries. They have termed the discovery a window into the ancient world. Archaeologists say the newly unearthed city was built over 3,400 years ago during the reign of Amenhotep III. The streets of the well-preserved city are flanked with houses having almost complete walls, some up to 3 meters high. The rooms are filled with various tools and mud bricks bearing seals of Amenhotep's cartouche. Experts have called for the need to preserve the area as an archaeological park. In Mexico City, the house of renowned British painter, sculptor and writer Leonora Carrington has been transformed into a museum. After 3 years of refurbishments, including structural reinforcement, the house is now ready to receive academics. More in this report. The townhouse in the Rollmont neighborhood was inhabited by the wise Carrington family for more than 60 years. She fled to Mexico City in 1942 and married Hungarian photographer Chicky Wise and had 2 sons, Pablo and Gabriel. Pablo had convinced his mother to turn the house into a museum after her death. In 2017, Wise was able to sell the house to the Metropolitan Autonomous University, which started to document and catalog items inside and to develop a museum project.
Significa entrar en su casa, significa...
We found a collection of texts, we found underlined phrases in textbooks, we found drafts of artwork. All these are findings that definitely, for the right person, for researchers, will be useful to explain many things with regards to who Leonora Carrington really was and where she got her inspiration from.
In total, the studio house holds 8,600 catalogued objects, including books, furniture, photographs, and incomplete sketches of her artworks. Visitors will be able to tour the rooms where the artist kept her records and handwritten messages, as well as personal items such as her spectacles and wristwatch. The university hopes the museum will become a useful source of information for students and academics.
independientemente del lugar.
Regardless of the place of birth, of Leonora's first training, of joining the ranks of surrealism, it seems to me it is part of the Mexican cultural panorama, and that, therefore, it is of absolute importance to get to know her life, knowing how she thought, knowing how she spent her days, in order to understand a woman who in many ways was ahead of her times.
Carrington's work was among the best-selling for a living surrealist. She is famous for her paintings of women and mythical beasts. A rebellious aristocrat, she also went on to win international recognition as a sculptor, painter, and writer. Christie's auction house sold one of her tempera on wood panel paintings for $1.48 million in 2009. European markets are slightly lower today, searching for direction after touching record high in the previous session. Investors monitor the pandemic situation as the threat of new lockdowns looms in the region. The Pan-European Stock 600 hovered just below the flat line, with insurance stocks shedding. Italy's FTSE MIB dipped close to 0.5%. London FTSE and Frankfurt DAX slipped fractionally, but the CAC 40 in Paris has edged up marginally. Earlier, most Asian stocks also traded lower after unexpectedly higher inflation data released by China. Now it's time to have a look at the weather update across the globe. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news.